The SEC and the Big Ten are going to attempt to fix all the problems in college football. That needs to happen. Man, it's damn near impossible.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your number one source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Realignment, coaching carousel, media stuff, that's in there as well. Transfer portal, we cover it right here every day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions do apply. So the SEC and the Big Ten had a big announcement over the weekend. We'll also talk about Alabama and the Pac-2 wanting to rebuild later in today's show. But the SEC and the Big Ten, the Power 2 conferences, the real Power 2 conferences in college athletics, specifically college football, which is what we focus on here, Locked On College Football, announced they're going to put together an advisory committee, a council, a commission, you call it whatever you want, to try and seek out solutions to all of the pending, current, and looming problems in college football and college athletics writ large to try and find a sustainable path forward. This is going to be an immensely difficult undertaking. I don't even have a guarantee for you that this committee can get anywhere, that they can do anything. Because right now, all it is trying to assess everything that needs to be settled, everything that needs to be figured out, everything that needs to be clarified and agreed upon by a lot of different parties. Remember, they're not just dealing with football. They're dealing with over 300 Division I universities here that are competing in college athletics. If you're going to have collective bargaining for the players, who represents them? Who votes on the representation there? In the NFL, you have 30, 35, and 40-year-old vets who are oftentimes the reps for player unions. If that's going to exist in college football, are you going to have 21-year-olds going in there against lawyers and representatives from the, NCAA, just as an example, or whatever entity could be created out of this particular commission? Is that something you're going to deal with? Are they going to hire their own representation? Are they going to vote on this? Here are the litany of issues, and I don't even know that I've listed them all here, that college football and college athletics have to figure out going forward if the SEC and Big Ten are serious about wanting to do this. And make no mistake, all of these aspects of the sport that I'm about to give to you are immensely complicated and need to be resolved to ensure stability and continuity within the sport. Employee status for the athletes, is that going to come about? Is that going to be official? Will they still be student athletes? Is their education going to be tied into a potential work contract there? What's the eligibility going to look like? Because if you're an employee of a university, well, you have 40-year-old professors there. You could be 31 and play, or can you work all of that out legally? Can you get it to go through the courts? That's a potential hurdle. Revenue sharing, both with the players and with the conferences. How do you adjudicate where the money goes? Because currently 80% of the revenue from the college football playoff, about $460 million roughly, per Ross Dellinger over at Yahoo Sports, who has a great rundown of some of the things I'm talking about on today's show. If the money is going to, 80% to the power conferences, 20 or 15% to the group of five, and 5% to the FCS schools, is that going to remain? Is everyone going to agree to this, that, and the other thing? That's something that they have to figure out. And by the way, when money's involved, you're not going to get people to roll over very easily if you ask them to take more or ask them to take less money while you potentially try and take more. The enforcement mechanism. Who is going to be the entity that hands down all these rules and regulations and says, this is how we're going to work it with employee compensation because we deem them to be employees now rather than student athletes. This is how this works. This is how that works. Is that enforcement going to come from the NCAA? Are they going to work with them? Because the NCAA is not a particularly popular entity at this point in time. Or is it going to be doled out by the conferences? For example, let's say employee status is granted to the athletes and football players specifically at all of these schools, because that's the program that's making most of the money in just about all these athletic departments. Let's say that they are deemed to be employees. Who are they working for? Employees sign a contract. I have a signed contract with the Locked On Podcast Network. That's who I work for. If you play football for the University of, I don't know, Ohio State, the Ohio State University, I suppose that they'd want me to refer to it for anyone listening to or watching the show in the Columbus area. Are they working for Ohio State University? Are they working for the Big Ten Conference? Are they working for some larger entity of college football? These things have to be figured out and agreed upon by a lot of different people. They also have to figure out the structure of the college football playoff. Currently, the playoff structure for 2024 is still stuck at 6+6. More on that coming later in the show. But let's say it moves to 5 automatic bids for the highest ranked conference champions and 7 at-large bids. Did you know that that contract for the CFP, including the media rights contract with ESPN, which still has not been finalized. They have to do that too, by the way. Did you know that the structure of the playoff is only set for 2 more years? Do you see how that's the first time I paused in this show? That's kind of an important detail here. Why? Because that means everything that we have come to know about the college football playoff and will learn as the new format plays out in the 2024 college football season can be subject to change. In just 2 years, we could have we had a stint from 2014 to 2023 in which it was a 14 playoff. There will be another iteration of the playoff from 2024 through 2025 for 2 seasons. Then they could change it again if they wanted to. They have to figure out who the media rights partner is going to be, what the structure is going to look like, how you get in, how you do revenue sharing for all that sort of stuff. They could even decide whether or not they want to stick with 12 teams. Actually, we want to go to 16. Actually, we want to go to 24. That's what the FCS does after all. And yeah, you see how that could potentially spiral out of control and get complicated. They also have to figure out what to do with NIL because the collectives operating adjacent to the schools, I don't know that there's anyone that thinks this is a great situation, especially if you're in, I don't know, Knoxville, Tennessee right now, and you bleed the checkered orange, then you got to be looking at the NIL situation going, wait a minute. We don't have consistent enforcement here. That's the case that the University of Tennessee is, of course, making in court against the NCAA. And so that has to be figured out. And by the way, all of this, as you directly deal with revenue sharing and money at universities, which have specific rules from the Department of Justice / Education, I think the DOJ is mainly where it comes from, Title IX considerations are going to come into play. Listen and just think about the breadth and depth of issues that I just listed. I don't even know that I've listed them all, but I think those are a lot of the big ones that have to be figured out. And these have to be rectified. And by the way, I'm not sitting here pretending that I've got all of the solutions. I'm not a power player in this situation. I am but a lowly podcast host who speaks to all of you wherever you're listening to or watching. And I appreciate you for doing so, by the way. And I feel that this is just such a huge undertaking, and yet it has to happen. All of these things have to be figured out. You cannot go forward. You will be stuck in court over and over again, as the NCAA has been several times before and is right now. Whether it's Tennessee or elsewhere, these lawsuits and everything that's going down, and everyone trying to keep everybody happy, complying with the law, complying with university rules and policies and Title IX from the DOJ. These are intensely complicated matters. But if there's anyone that is qualified to try and solve everything that I just listed, I could spend 20 minutes maybe coming up with an idea for how to solve one of these things. But I would be doing so talking into this particular microphone here in my home office and not getting pushback from others who are affected by a potential move here and there. This is going to be immensely complicated, but it has to be done pretty quickly. Because when have you ever heard of a media deal getting done right up around the time that something is actually scheduled to start? So if the playoff is going to change in 2 years, this stuff has to be done kind of, within the next year. So the SEC and the Big Ten announced this over the weekend. I, for one, salute them for trying to make something happen. It's going to be immensely difficult. There are a lot of different factors to follow, and as more developments unfold, we'll certainly discuss them here on the show. A development in Tuscaloosa that you should be aware of, but not for the reason you think. You should all be aware of LinkedIn Jobs forever and always, because when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is not just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire, gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring's easy. When you have that many quality candidates, so easy. In fact, 86% of small businesses, they get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. You can do so as well if you post your job for free over at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Can anyone tell me what tampering actually is and why it's a problem? Well, here's the actual definition, or at least a roughly accurate definition. In college athletics, a coach is not allowed to touch base with a player on another team unless that player is specifically and definitively and officially in the transfer portal. And so when the word tampering gets thrown around, I do that. I sigh, I shake my head, I drop my head, I do all of these sorts of things. Why? Because every time the word tampering gets thrown around, it is being exaggerated, shall we say. Because tampering sounds terrible. It sounds awful. Like it's some evil, horrible, nefarious. Do you know what tampering could be? Tampering could be as simple as a coach texting a player who's on another team after he has completed his final game of the regular season with that team. And then after announcing he won't play in the bowl game and go in the transfer portal, he then decides, I'm going to go in the transfer portal. And he hasn't gone into the portal yet, but the coach texted him, he's not officially in the portal. Tampering. It has this really ugly cloud to it that sounds a heck of a lot worse than it is. Why am I talking about this? So Les Fifita is the father of Noah Fifita. Noah Fifita was the quarterback for Arizona who led them to 7 straight wins to end the year, very nearly beat USC on the road, should have, as a matter of fact, in Los Angeles, though USC also could have kicked a field goal and won the game at the end of regulation. But I digress. It was the first 10-win season since 2014 for the Wildcats. They carry immense momentum into the Big 12. Fifita and star wide receiver Tetairoa McMillan are remaining with the Wildcats despite Jedd Fisch and other now former Arizona players going in the portal up to Seattle to be a part of the Washington Huskies football program. Brent Brennan is in. Noah Fifita and Tetairoa McMillan, they are the faces. They are the stars of Arizona going into the Big 12 and having a chance to compete in their new conference. And so Les Fifita is Noah's father, and told someone in an interview at The Athletic that, well, he'd been reached out to by Alabama. They were interested in whatnot. This is fascinating to me, not because of potential tampering allegations. I, for one, do not give a rat's rear end if a coach texts a player during the season even and says, hey, are you interested in coming here this offseason? If so, let's have a conversation once your season comes to a close. Tell me, are you a working professional right now? Because as I talked about earlier in today's show, we're potentially, likely, dare I say, moving to a model in which college athletes are treated as employees. Now, insider trading, spying companies, sharing company secrets, all that sort of stuff, those laws are all good and fine. Have you ever been working at a job before, which is apparently how we're supposed to treat college football in the modern world? Have you ever been working at a job before and been contacted by another prospective employer? Were you in the midst of a group project, perhaps getting ready for a big presentation, and someone reached out and said, hey, we'd be interested in interviewing you for this job over here, or hey, let's have a phone call, hey, let's have a cup of coffee? I'm going to go out on a big, very frail, very long tree limb and say that happens in the professional world a lot in a variety of industries. If a coach decides to text a player I understand the negative ramifications that people in the comment section are probably already going off on. Well, then players will never be committed. They'll never do this. If you are fostering a great culture and one in which you have a good relationship with any players that might want to enter the transfer portal of a star variety like Noah Fifita and Tetairoa McMillan, you know what will happen? Exactly what has happened. Kalen DeBoer reportedly reached out. Okay. And he wants to stay at Arizona. That's big whoop number one. If you don't want your players to leave, then foster an environment, whether it's NIL or future, compensation. If those rules change one day and everything like that, or culture, or be winning in a way that doesn't make other options appealing. Secondly, just because a coach doesn't contact a player during the season doesn't mean that coach won't eventually get in contact with the player if he does enter the transfer portal. That's the second thing. The third thing, and this is perhaps the most important one. How many kids have gone into the transfer portal over the last couple of years? The answer is thousands and thousands. How many of them have found homes quickly? A lot of them. Some of them never found homes at all. Some took a long time to find a new college to go play football at. It depends on every situation. Let me ask you this question. If you are someone listening to or watching the show, and it is your belief that tampering is a big, major, horrible, no good, very bad problem in college football, of the thousands of kids that gone into the transfer portal over the last couple of years, how many do you think were, quote unquote, tampered with? How many? I don't have a guess for you, but do you think that answer is zero? If so, you're being incredibly naive. As Ultron once told Vision, circa 2016 in Avengers Age of Ultron, that might have been 2014, I could have that wrong, you're unbearably naive. But I don't think most people are. I think we're all aware. And so today's tampering was yesterday's paying players. The players getting paid, they've just been bought, they just did. Yeah, everybody's been doing that for a long time. It's what's called a poorly kept secret, or the worst kept secret in college sports, that this was transpiring. If you are a fan of a major program that's brought in big time transfers this year, do you think zero of those kids have ever been officially, by the book, by the rules, tampered with? What if someone goes into the portal, the situation I laid out earlier, after their bowl game, but they've only announced it, they haven't decided yet, or they haven't officially declared themselves in the transfer portal. They haven't submitted the paperwork. It hasn't been processed by the NCAA. If a coach reaches out to that kid, that's tampering. Does that sound like a big problem? Does that sound like something? Of the litany of issues that I laid out earlier for the SEC and Big Ten to potentially have to rectify to shift the dynamics of college sports and fix the issues that are in place. I didn't even mention the calendar earlier. That's probably one of the biggest ones I was forgetting, but that's a sidebar. Of all of those issues, did you hear me bring up tampering? I got news for you. If you think this is a problem that can be solved, it can't. We live in the age of technology, mass media, and mass communication. You can get somebody's number. You cannot put that person's name in your phone, but know the number if you don't want to be caught or you want to be secretive or anything like that. If people want to do this, they're going to. And college athletes for a long time have gotten benefits that would have been outside the NCAA rules, some of which are no longer outside the rules. Some of them are still getting benefits that are deemed outside the rules, and there are debates about that with Michigan, and everything like that. It's a hamburger, it's a cheeseburger. The whole thing is an absolute circus. It's a complete and utter circus out there. But when I see these, reports or tweets going around about, oh man, he was tampered with, man, that's just going to happen. That just comes with the territory. It's just like saying in 2005, well, so-and-so Reggie Bush was paid. You think he was the only big-time college football player that was getting any money that the NCAA didn't see, that they wouldn't have wanted him to have? Do you think he was the only one? If this player was tampered with over there, do you think this guy is being tampered with over there? The answer is probably yes. I don't know which guys. This is all speculative at some level on my part. I feel pretty confident in saying that tampering takes place in college football, but it is more widespread than it's like speeding. If everybody on the highway is going 80 in a 70 and the cop says, I'm pulling you over, you know what the first thing that guy's going to say? Excuse me, we were all going 80 miles an hour. I'm just trying to keep up with the speed of traffic here. I'm just trying to stay in foot with what my peers are doing. That's what's going on here. And the bigger thing about this was not that Noah Fifita was tampered with, potentially, according to this sort of stuff. And whatever, man. Let's say he was, which it appears that he was, by the rules and everything. The bigger story to me there is Kalen DeBoer doesn't really like Jalen Milroe. He wanted to bring in somebody who he thinks is better. I wonder how that plays out over the course of the season. I wonder all the time about the Pac-12. Often. Some of you may know why, some of you may not. We need not dive into the details there. The Pac-12 could revive. You can always revive excitement over at FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3. You can bet on who's going to win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's all it takes. $5 or more, you get $200 in bonus bets if it wins. FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. The Pac-12 is like a phoenix. I just had to let that sit out there so some of you Harry Potter fans can know exactly where I'm going with this particular analogy today. The Pac-12 is like a phoenix because every now and then a phoenix bursts into flames. This is, of course, a mythical creature. And then as Dumbledore so carefully explains, rest in peace to the late Richard Harris, to Harry in Chamber of Secrets, the second Harry Potter movie. For those of you who are absolute noobs out there and don't like Harry Potter, I would love to Leslie Knope you to Ann Perkins and force you to watch all 8 movies, but that's a different conversation. He talks about how the phoenix is set ablaze and then reborn from its ashes. Well, the Pac-12 can very easily do this. Easily is perhaps a little bit too strong of a term. It's feasible. It's possible. And Washington State's Kirk Schulz wants that to happen. So, amidst these discussions and the litany of issues that I laid out earlier on today's show, one of them was the playoff has not yet moved, though it needs to and should, to a 5+7 format. 5 highest ranked conference champions plus 7 at-large bids. That cannot happen until the Pac-12, which is still existing, by the way, it just has 2 teams in it. Until the Pac-12 and Kirk Schulz, who's chairing that particular board, vote in favor of doing so, that isn't going to happen. And so Kirk Schulz brought a proposal amidst all of these discussions that got some pushback, but he is flexing what little power he's got for the good people up in Pullman and Corvallis right now to try and put them in the best situation possible to rebuild the league one day from its ashes. Would it be the same? No, of course not. But I've talked many times before about rebuilding a league centered around the best teams out of the Mountain West and the best teams out of the American Conference. I think that is a viable path forward and one that could absolutely be on the table. A reverse merger with the Mountain West could also be on the table there. But Kirk Schulz is saying to the rest of the governors on the College Football Playoff Committee, I am not going to vote in favor, and a unanimous vote is required for 2024 and 2025. I'm not going to vote for your little proposal to go from 6+6 to 5+7 unless you ensure that the Pac-12 is going to continue getting college football playoff revenue once all of these dominoes start to fall in the realignment and college football playoff landscape. And the reason he's doing that is the same reason that Oregon State and Washington State went and got a concession from the departing 10 schools from the Pac-12 that gave them an outsized share of the 2024 revenue for the Pac-12, or 23-24, however you want to look at it, that gave them a war chest of a couple $100 million. They want to have financial assets at their disposal so that they can make moves to continue having a conference and build a conference. And remember the year 2026, because that is when everything, technically 2025, it could all go, well, 5, 6, we'll just go with 2026 for now because it's easier. 2026 is when you could have massive shakeups in the college sports landscape. And everybody else who reportedly was not very happy with Kirk Schulz, but what does he care? I mean, what are you going to do? Relegate them to the Mountain West? They haven't officially joined, of course. The rest of their sports are in the West Coast Conference, though, which is a step down from the Pac-12. Though a good G5 league, or a mid-major league at the very least, if you're talking about hoops. So if you're Washington State and Oregon State looking at this situation, what are you thinking about? Well, in 2026, there is going to be an inflection year in college football, and we want to be prepared to act in a way that allows us to be as competitive as possible. How do you do that? Build the best conference you can. And they can do that using the war chest they got from the 10 teams that have departed, which, some of it pays out this year, some of it pays out next year, but it's a decent amount of money. And if they were to ensure that they get revenue, they keep their athletic departments competitive. And in the process, if they're able to ensure they get a certain amount as an officially recognized conference, then the revenue coming their way would also help them remain competitive, or as competitive as possible, in the national landscape of college sports and the changing conferences. And so Kirk Schulz is putting his foot down and saying, I'm not going to give you what you want until you can give me assurances that you can give us, Washington State and Oregon State, what we need to continue to succeed and thrive as best we can in this evolving landscape of college athletics, which has kicked us to the curb for absolutely no good reason. I mean, money is a good reason to some, but that's a different conversation. I don't think we need to go down that rabbit hole, but that is the crux of what Kirk Schulz is doing here, and I understand it. Now, how is that going to be received? This is the blowback that Kirk Schulz is getting publicly. I'm sure he's getting it privately as well, which is, dude, you are not a big power player here. That is what the world has told you. Stop acting like you've got weight to throw around. To which Kirk Schulz could say, that's weird. Seems like I've got some weight to throw around because you can't make the change that you want to do unless you get my vote. And so the Pac-12, which has a 2-year grace period, by the way, to exist as a conference under the NCAA minimum threshold of 8 teams, what if they played a conference championship, guaranteed, of course, to be between Oregon State and Washington State? What if they just did that? And what if one of them was good enough, and either one of them could be, by the way, to be ranked inside the top 25? They could be sneaking in there and grabbing an auto bid. But at the very least, the reason that Kirk Schulz has leverage here is there's not a single other conference commissioner, Big 12, ACC, Big 10, SEC, that want a 6+6 format next year. Because even if the Pac-2 champion is neglected from that discussion and would under no circumstance receive an auto bid, do you think that those other commissioners whose conferences get money the more teams they get into the playoff, need I remind you, would that happen and they be happy about it when a team getting in, say, I don't know, Liberty, for instance, the football team, not the insurance company, just to be clear, would that happen? And the other conferences be okay with it? No, they wouldn't. But the rules are written as such that for the next 2 years, they can not change to a 5+7 unless they get a unanimous vote. Now, this is where a game of chicken is going to be played, because for 2026 and beyond, as I talked about, you're starting from scratch. New media deal, new playoff structure, new everything. And if the last impression that Kirk Schulz, representing the Pac-2, gave the power players in college sports and college football specifically was, I'm going to hold you hostage till you give me what I want, even if you don't want to give it to me, well, that might come back to bite him in the rear end a little bit later. So he may have to be careful. But in the short term, I see the play. In the long term, he could be developing a reputation that might come back to hurt him later on. And they may say, yeah, we're actually, just think about this, for instance, just as a hypothetical to end today's show. Let's say he gets some concessions out of them and they begrudgingly send the money over and everything like that and give the Pack some legitimacy and a chance to rebuild. And then they start from scratch in 2026 and they actually are just going to Power 2 conferences. Which of those conference commissioners is going to feel super inclined to do Kirk Schulz and Oregon State a solid in Pullman and Corvallis and include them in that mix when they've been left behind once before, and the last thing that they did together was one holding the other hostage? Game theory, I believe they call it, at least at some level. That may or may not be right. Why don't we end with that show? Me possibly misusing a particular term to try and sound smarter than I may be. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.